Fab. So thank you everyone for joining us today for our next free public online lecture. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Roberta Mazza today. Roberta is a papyrologist and lecturer in Greco-Roman material culture at the University of Manchester. She's researched and published extensively and worked in collections all over the world, notably the John Rylands collection and our very own, the Egypt Exploration Society's own Oxyrhynchus Papyri collection, for which she also sits on its multi-institutional management committee. And if this wasn't enough already, Roberta also sits on our board of trustees and has committed her recent research to the ethics of public and private collecting and academic involvement in the antiquities market. But where do we begin, and what are the narratives of discovery surrounding these collections? Well, that's what Dr. Mazza will explore with us today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Roberta.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a delight finally to speak about one of our one of our archives in terms of the Egypt Exploration Society, and one of the most famous collections of the world, that is the Oxyrhynchus papyri. So what I'm going to do today is to delve into narratives of discovery. That is the way in which findings of papyri have been conveyed to the public and to different audiences. What you see here is a very famous image of the site of Oxyrhynchus, front-facing el-Bahnasa, that was first investigated by Petrie and then Grenfell and Hunt in what we call the season of 1896. 1897. The EES has an extensive archive of images that were left by many scholars. These ones you can really enjoy through our Flickr accounts, and I want to mention our Steph Boonstra and all the fantastic people, volunteers that have helped us in bringing to light this material and put it online. So, aims of this paper. First of all, I would like to discuss the formation of one of the most famous papyrus collections, as I said, that has been well published and studied, not only in the UK, but all over the world, the P-Oxy. Through discussing the story of the finding and the formation of the collection, I would also like to reconsider the history of the Egypt Exploration Fund, nowadays, of course, Egypt Exploration Society, and its politics, what was behind the support of research in Egypt, and how some of the key people, in particular in this discovery of the papyri, were playing their game, so to say. Through this analysis that, of course, concerns a period which is very far from us, because it's over a century ago, and it's really the beginning of papyrology and Egyptology. So the historical and academic context was indeed completely different. Egypt was controlled by foreigner powers, European mainly, and despite the fact that it was a protectorate, so to say, of the UK, there was also a heavy international presence, in particular the Antiquities Service, in charge of controlling the antiquities and organize excavations and so forth, so on, was under heavy control of France as a sort of traditional division of powers between the two nations. So through this story that is indeed far from us, but still with us, I would like to call for a change, in particular in many things, as you probably already know, but in particular in the way we provide narratives of discovery in our fields. I put that we between brackets because it's a we that is not only made by academics who have been meant to be the discoverers, but also by the media, for instance, as will show. Newspapers were a big part of the story that have their own narratives. Any one of us who has had to do with newspapers and other media is well aware that the way we present our research and findings in, let's say, books or academic journals is completely different from what newspapers and the media in general ask from us. There should always be some sort of super hyper narrative, otherwise your discovery and what it brings with it will never reach the wider audience. We actually, I would like to start with one of these magazines that were a means through which Grenfell and Hunt, but particularly Grenfell, because in this first phase of their building up of papyrology, it was especially Grenfell in the first line, presented their exceptional discovery of what was really a flood of hundreds, thousands papyri, how it took place in the winter, in particular of 1897. So as you can see in the way they are presented, of course, there are the portraits, and they state that they are the discoverers, and indeed they are, at some extent, that they were really those who were heavily involved in the extractions of these fragments. However, I think that a lot of this narrative has lost track of many other actors involved in the achievement. So first of all, to give you also the wider context, I would like to recall Grenfell and Hunt, first steps in the finding of papyri and in Egyptology. We should remember that we have these barriers between different disciplines, that is Egyptology, classic, papyrology, and so forth, so on. But actually, when we dig into the archives, we realize that these are somehow false labels that tend to erase a much more interesting environment. So Grenfell, in my view, was really a creature, a student of Flinders Petrie. If you go and check all the archaeological reports and many accounts that Petrie in particular has left of their campaigns, seasons together, you would see that Flinders Petrie really had a heavy influence on the formation of Grenfell. So Grenfell started joining Flinders Petrie in Egypt in 1893. So he was on 2 excavations seasons with him before actually something changed, and he was sponsored together with Hogarth, so with another senior tutor different from Flinders Petrie, by the EEF for some survey in the Fayoum. The Fayoum was really the key place in the mind of papyrologists and classicists, because it was from there that actually Petrie and others, including dealers, were bringing to light a high number of papyri that mainly reached the market, and in this way went to different collections. 1877 is the key year in this respect. So after this survey, in which they made amazing findings, Hogarth and Grenfell organized in the summer an exhibition at Burlington House, in which the material was on display, and in theory they were ready to go to another season in the Fayoum. However, something happened, that is Hogarth, who actually turned out to be not so keen on Egypt. If one reads his later autobiography, became the director of the British School at Athens and left the EEF. While in the meanwhile, Flinders Petrie, who had been made professor of Egyptology at UCL, was rejoining the EES after a period of fallout. I would like to read with you a section of Hogarth's speech at the EEF of that year. So we are actually in November 1897. I hate numbers in English. I would like to say number in Italian. Anyway, that is the time. So as now, also back there, because we are a little bit traditionalist here in the ES too, the annual meeting of the society took place, and Hogarth is preparing the path for Grenfell, and also started to ask, together with Petrie, to create a Greco-Roman branch completely dedicated to funds for papyri and other Greco-Roman material. So he writes, these scraps, that is the papyri too, which were on exhibit to the famous Burlington House exhibition, illustrated all departments in the public and private life of a dead age, an age that seems, after all, to have been not unlike our own. Here we see one of the hooks through which Hogarth and others, Grenfell and Hunt too, were trying to get people involved and enthusiastic funders for their researches. Let's see, like, the papyri and these other objects are showing that the people back there looked like us, like, the famous so-called Fayoum portraits. And you will remember also that we made the exhibition include not only the finds at Karanis and Bakyas, but papyri procured by both of us all over Egypt, at Cairo, at Gizeh, at Medinet el-Fayoum, at Akhmim, at Luxor. And this we did intentionally, for the one thing we wished above all others to demonstrate was the value of this society maintaining in Egypt a representative with the qualification and the zeal of Mr. Grenfell. Hogarth goes on explaining the skills, the key skills of Grenfell, and explain that he is well acquainted with them all, that is the dealers now, and they know him. And when, by that strange influence of rumor, that fame, which passes with incredible rapidity from mouth to mouth in the East, outstripping even the telegraph and intelligence departments, it is known that Mr. Grenfell is going up the Nile. Tin boxes full of brown scraps are unearthed in all quarters from their secret places and find their way to rooms or river barges, ready to his advent. As I have often said, the dealer is an evil, but an evil not on our heads or our knees. And our chief duty for the present is to minimize the harm he does by, as quickly and completely as possible, getting his finds out of his hand into ours. So it is absolutely clear from what is written here that the skills that were required from an Egyptologist or someone active for the ES in Egypt at the time were both skills of, an excavator, someone able to do field research, and who better than Grenfell, who was, formed at the school of Petrie, but also someone who was very much skilled in hunting the market. So the idea is that to buy papyri in order to save them. That is one of the arguments that still, buyers and collectors bring forward. And again, it is thanks to the reading of the journals of Petrie that nowadays are all digitized and available thanks to the hard work of the Griffith Institute of Oxford, that we can, study the methods of Petrie. So first thing, every season when he arrived in Egypt around November to remain there till the spring of the following year, the first thing he did was to search through the well-known dealers that he knew. But let's go back to our 1896 and to explain what led Petrie, the EF, and then Grenfell to move the plants from the Fayum to this strip of land in which Oxyrhynchus is placed. So again, through the proceedings of the annual meeting, we read that Petrie was already in conversations with De Morgan, that at the time was at the head of the Antiquities Service, to obtain a concession. So of course there was a bureaucracy to be followed for a strip of land that went to the Fayum, basically, but not including the Fayum, so a strip of the desert, basically, down to Minya. And that is, in fact, described in that article that Grenfell and Hunt published, Grenfell published for the McClure magazine, the American magazine that I showed you before. So as you can see from Google map, of course, el-Bahnasa was a key point in the map because it was very well placed nearby Beni Mazar, where there was a station, and also sort of in the middle of the strip that they had as a concession. So we are in late November 1896, and Petrie has just arrived in Cairo, as always. That year he was assisted by Gear, who was a student who was with him, paid by his brand new, not so new, but almost new chair. So here, really, the journals are a fantastic resource to see how he went about. The journals of Petrie are a funny ensemble that is, we call them journals, but actually they were sort of semi-official reports in the form of letters that he, later on, actually his wife as well, were sending from Egypt back to, for instance, Griffith or members of the EES in order to document what was happening. So they are an interesting form of really narrative in themselves. So we can follow really almost day by day what is happening. So Petrie is there, and then the first thing he and Gear do is, of course, hunting for papyri. And that year, there were really a lot of them, and Petrie is able to buy something that he actually reserved for Grenfell and Hunt. But the big hit of that season was the famous Bacchylides scroll that actually Budge was able to assure for the British Museum. The piece is now in the British Library and was literally smuggled out of the country, causing a lot of problems, because the problems in the eyes of Grenfell and others, because the Antiquities Service was really upset for the episode. Anyway, the 29th of November, Grenfell and Hunt joined for perhaps a dinner, it's not explained, event, Petrie and Gear, who the day after left for el-Bahnasa. Grenfell went for a very quick visit there, but it's only on the 20th of December that the Oxford Dioscuri, as they were nicknamed, really settled down in at Oxyrhynchus. Petrie was really disappointed with Oxyrhynchus because he recognized that it was very good for Grenfell and Hunt. There were, you know, Roman cemeteries and other stuff very interesting for them, but he went away with his workman, a really interesting figure, Ali Suefi, first for some trips, and then he left for a site up north. So Oxyrhynchus remained in the hands really of Grenfell, basically, and of course helped by Hunt. They remained in strict communication with, you know, the patron, so to speak, the big professor. And it was only on the 10th of January, as I said before, that the big flood started. I want to point your attention on a number of studies that have touched upon the big event that is, you know, the flood of papyri from the 10th January 1897 onwards. So, for instance, Nongbri has, you know, given new insight in the mechanics of the finding. Todd Hickey and Jim Keenan have brought to light actually material also from the ES that are these letters of Grenfell that I really invite you to read. And I myself found an interesting letter of Grenfell to Griffith in the Islands, in which he reported of 273 boxes of material just arrived from Cairo after going through all the process of the partage with the Antiquities Service and the stamps and everything, and reaching finally Oxford. But what so that is very well known, and actually is the narrative of discovery that all of us have somehow have been used at listening at, but I want to tell you a little bit of another story. And first of all, I would like to bring into this narrative or the realia of discovery, of course, the hidden hands, according to that fabulous book of Stephen Quirk of a few years ago, in which he has really opened up the work on the archaeological work to the workforce, so the Egyptians who were on the site. So here you can see a picture of this Ali Suefi of Laun, that was one of the best men to work with Petrie, that is provided through the site of the Petrie Museum. But again, I really invite you to access that book, to open that book, to buy that book, because it's fantastic, and it brings to light, that other part of the discovery that has been hidden for a lot, too much time, that is the workmen of Grenfell. And here we have one of these famous images that we have. I have a bad cold. That we have in our archives, in which you have Grenfell supervising his workforce and following really the teaching of Petrie. So he was very well doing with the bakshish that he was providing for anyone doing an exceptional finding, in order to ensure that it went not dispersed through dealers and other means. This is a view again of how the site looked like. But here we get the first insight in the arrival, finally, of Petrie and gear on site. So Petrie has just arrived, and as usual, he started going around, and this is what he tells us. I went over the immense mounds of Bernesa, about a mile long and half-mile wide, and I saw was late Roman. All I saw was late Roman, excellent from Grenfell, but not for me, as I told you before. But there must be a fine cemetery here somewhere. I finally fixed on a piece of spare ground by the canal and surrounded with young palm groves to make our camp. So he settled down there and start waiting for the luggage that had to come from the station. Still, as not baggage came, I sat waiting on the bank, but at sunset we, myself and two policemen, had the most pressing invitation from a dumb man to come cover and stay with him on the east side. So we are on the west side of the Bar Youssef, where the camp will be settled. And Petrie and Gear and Ali are waiting for the baggage, and they are actually joined by some policemen that similarly were looking for a place where to put a station, because the area was very much exposed to attack from what they call the Bedouins. So Bedouins raid. And they are joined by these men that for the entire passages in which he is recalled, he's always called the dumb man. So through a disability, never by name. They are invited to spend the night at the house of the brother of this man, who is the sheikh of the place, so a prominent figure of the community. And the day after, of course, what do? they go and see if there are interesting objects to be purchased, and so you can read what they acquired. But much more interesting is what happens a few days later, when again the poor Petrie is still waiting for the stamp of his permission from Cairo. He is also trying to pull together a good camp before the other workmen will come. And so at some point, these famous dumb man friend join him again. And so this is what he says. On returning after my morning surveying, I found my dumb friend here, and after lunch, he went round the ruins to show me what he knew. The mass of stonework, which has served the town as a quarry for years past, has passages and chambers in it. And from other people, I hear of 3 statues having been found in it. They were smashed up and made into coffee mills. It looks to me as if it might have been a catacomb for the sacred fish. A tomb for any one prince would not be so large. Then he showed me the city wall at the end, where it was scarcely visible, and went some way along it till I told him that I knew it and had planned it the day before. Then he showed me the city wall, as I said before. So then he told me that quantities of papyri were found there, and began grabbing. In a couple of minutes, he turned up a piece of Greek accounts of the 2nd century AD. But so soon as we got on the Arab part of the mounds, though I had not yet noticed the difference, he observed that there were not any papyri there, that was all no good, all of Muslim age, but the whole of the Roman part, not capped with Arab, contained writings. So we are at the very beginning of December of 1896. There's no trace of Grenfell and Hunt, and this actually is the first written attestation of a finding of papyri in the season of 1896 and 1897. It took place because Petrie was guided to a place by a local man that knew perfectly well what was under their feet. So the first point that I want to make is that Grenfell, Hunt, and Petrie didn't go at Oxyrhynchus blinded. They, of course, knew through the market that the area was providing material, including papyri, and once on the site, they were actually guided by this man whose identity is lost. I'm trying to figure out how to find his name. It won't be easy. So to conclude, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that really this achievement is the achievement of many agencies, including, of course, the ES, including the academic discoverers of the site. And I want to conclude with an image that comes from our archives. I'm not sure which campaigns actually it is, but it's a very interesting and image that to us, of course, suggests a number of thoughts. That shadow that apparently is the shadow of Hunt taking the picture on the side is like, you know, a sort of heavy presence that has a little bit hide all of the rest, and first and foremost the Egyptians, who perfectly knew about their history and what was there. But with this, I prefer to stop, and I'm very keen on discussion.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for that really fascinating examination, I think is the word I'm going to use, of that first season at Oxyrhynchus. And I think just being able to find a site in that way in the records and to uncover the stages that have been gone through before we even reach what we often receive as a sort of hero narrative, I think is really important. That just isn't done enough. I'm just, before we get to the discussion, going to reopen the chat. So if anyone wants to put their messages in the chat box, that should, I hope, now now be open. And the Q&A is still open, but you're welcome to put your messages in the chat as well. I think that last picture that you showed, I think is just really emotive almost in a way, because I think we're so used to seeing these, great pioneers, Grenfell and Hunt, and in that case, we're sort of seeing the ghost of them, but that overbearing nature. And that seems to be something that we're hearing now a lot more through other projects that are surfacing these sort of, hidden narratives, hidden hands working on the sites. Do you think that that picture was staged in some way so that the shadow was maybe meant to be there, or?
I don't think so. It's how it resonates with us, which is interesting. And also, I want to be clear on this. I'm not denying the role of Grenfell and Hunt as, achievers under many respects. What I think we have to rethink is, the entire political and historical period in which they operated. Of course, they were educated in a certain way. And so we see things that they were unable to see. So I think reading through their letters, they were really crazy about their work, and but they were the sons of their time, of course, of a certain kind of education. It's classics, it's Oxford, and it's 1890s. So what we should do is to change that narrative and make it much richer, because it's much more interesting than, this heroic sort of tale, like a sort of Indiana Jones that nobody wants to hear any longer, I think. So this is what I think.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You're absolutely right. I think when you open up your horizons a little bit to the different people that are operating in this time, particularly people like Ali Swafi is a good example. We find, for example, at Amana in our archive, there are whole lists of workers that have sort of been ignored in the archive at the expense of not totally wrong to do so, but people like Pendlebury, who have an amazing story to tell, but it doesn't give you that whole picture. You want the more holistic approach to what's happening. And I think it really, especially when you see these pictures of largely unnamed workers, it gives this sort of element of power and domination and the different ways in which it's been told. And I know we chatted just before the event started about how the communication of archaeological fieldwork is often communicated, is couched in a way in which will generate the most donations or the most funds. So there's a certain element of throwing money into the mix, the economy of communications, I suppose. Is that something that you found in your research?
Yes, I mean, there are there's a lot to be said about the role of people like Ali and others, also in the way archaeology actually was done on the field, because they were training others to the job. But I also, this fact that the Griffith Institute has put everything online has given me the opportunity. The whole thing was only done, I think, last year, to go through a number of the journals, and you would see that Petrie is very ambivalent also in the in the way he engaged with the locals, let's say. So he was in many conversations, like, you know, the visit to this sheikh home was also taking place in other places, and he recognized that many information were actually taken in that way. Then, of course, there is all the economy of the story. That is how, for instance, this is has been brought to light very well in Jim Keenan and Todd Hickey article, how every type of finding was given a price, like on the market. That amount of papyri would sell for, and Grenfell gives the sums. So these were people who really knew the market value and used it as a tool somehow to obtain funding from the EF, but also from other sponsors. For instance, the Rylands Library, first Mrs. Rylands and later others. Not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's well, I think it's an ongoing discussion, isn't it, about the role of economics in all of this, and it's something that I know people are researching at the moment. I'll stop hogging the questions, because there are other people. Just a comment by Tatiana about the you mentioned about I think he's called the dumb man in your research, and Tatiana comments on the dehumanizing of prominent locals being quite harrowing in other excavation reports as a way to sort of downplay the role that they're playing. And she makes reference to another part of her research in Palestine, where someone's named solely as the blind man. So I think it's interesting to look at that as a research topic, I suppose.
I see.
Yeah, Anne-Marie also talks about a deaf person guiding Grenfell and Hunt to the papyri, but did you come across any information on any of the children that participated in the excavations?
There is there is a lot about the children. They are not so often mentioned. I think that Brent Nongbury has something about the child who found the famous logia, that is P-oxy-11, which is you know, this important Christian text that now we know was the Greek version of the Gospel of Thomas. So in that case, you have the name, I believe. There are also mentions in general about the skills of the children. So, for instance, Petrie comments on this in various occasions, also in his autobiographies, like how he organized groups of men and children together, because they had different skills, and also girls, little girls. So yes, there's a lot about this, but mainly anonymous. Yeah.
I always remember a former trustee at the society. I think I made a passing reference to workmen on sites, and she told me off, and she was quite right to do so. She said, they're not all men. There are children and there are women involved. And you know what? She's absolutely right. And I went back to all the archive images and with a fresh perspective, and you realize that, you know, there's all manner of people from all different backgrounds working at these sites that, you know, so quickly just referred to as workmen. And I think, you know, it's important to go back and look at that. Catherine says, we know of at least one papyrus that reached France through a member of the Expedition d'Egypte. I wonder, do we have signs, what triggered locals to excavate their local ruins, and when did that impulse start? So is it linked to European colonization and the market that Europe demanded or created, or are there older and different dynamics at play?
This is a very hard question to answer. I must say, and it's a question I'm wondering about a lot. If you read carefully, for instance, the journal sections that I've given just for this case, you would see that it was a while that actually there was a sort of acknowledgement that there were things there. Now, of course, here, yes, there's much to be done. And also, I should admit that I am not trained in Arabic, so it would be interesting perhaps to know if there are, records of that are not always the same kind of records that we read as European trained people with, our own archives. But for sure, Oxyrhynchus, I believe that the choice of going to Heracleopolis had certainly given papyri before that time. There were also texts, especially in that season, arriving from Hermopolis, that is again in that strip. So, so I don't think that it was, by chance that there were different reasons to go there. One was it was not far away from the Fayum, but a new area, and Petrie was very upset for the fact that actually the Fayum was very worked out, especially for what he was searching for. And I think that, the hints that were coming from dealers' material were also important, yes.
Yeah, and Catherine's just written back saying our Ottomist and Mamlukist colleagues should need to have a chat with us. And I know I've already plugged this in the previous lecture we've had, but Akasha El-Dali's book talks a lot about sort of state-sponsored treasure hunting, he calls it, but it's very much the same thing, that there is they created a royal or a state monopoly on the excavation of ancient sites, but I think maybe it's also different depending on what the object of the search was for. Papyri maybe not so much, but certainly gold in tombs was something they were interested in. So
that's the other thing that is it's difficult to gather, when the interest specifically in papyri. I mean, it was already there because, of course, since the very beginning of the 19th century, there were, the Vienna collections and other big collections, Paris, and also the British Museum were also looking for papyri. So, yeah.
And so Francis is talking about, and I think this goes back to your discussion of the sort of narrative of discovery, the narrative of discovery being crafted as a conquest. I think this is fascinating because Francis says even the language of campaign seems to further this idea. And is this language widespread in these kinds of discovery accounts, in your opinion?
Yes, it is. And actually, usually I take a lot of attention not to use the word campaign, but season, which is a little less aggressive. But I think that the structure is indeed the same. This was the sort of cultural branch of a political initiative. It was the conquest of a region, of a country, and it's an imperial achievement. in which, you know, armies and scholars went hand in hand since at least the Napoleon campaign with Denon and the description and so forth, so on. So yes, this is how empires work. I think it's the Roman Empire did the same.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that question has really made me think about you know, to what extent this is still happening, because even when I started working at the EES, which is not that long ago, we still regularly used the word mission, the mission to a monarch, and that use of language is actually quite telling, isn't it? I didn't come up with the phrase, but it's but yeah, I think that's really interesting when you think about it. And you know, you talk a bit, or you spoke a bit just now about this sort of Savian narrative in procuring antiquities as a way to justify taking them from the dealer because we are the saviors.
Yes.
And that equally has that sort of almost missionary campaign mission feel to it, doesn't it? That savior narrative that has been spun from these narratives of discovery.
And yes, that's the thing of this salvage archaeology that we still use nowadays, of course, in a completely different way, but that's another thing that I'm thinking a lot about, that is, what if, after all, these papyri at some point became, okay, waste for those who discarded them, and then they were found by this searcher of the sebak, that was this material, that's a mix of organic things that were used in both the fabrication of gunpowder, I think, something like that, and also to fertilize the ground. And so everyone was obsessed with this idea that you know, the sebakin, the searcher of this material, were wasting all the papyri that were in it. So they had to recover all this material and salvage it from that end. And sometimes I think, of course, from my point of view of a European who was educated to the classics, I would prefer, you know, the text to be saved, to the organic material to be used for agriculture. But who decides what to do about, you know, the soil of a country? I mean, this is really something that is haunting me, especially a country where, you know, there was and still is a shortage of land to produce the food. So it's really
it's really fascinating when
is Bacchylides or a letter of a 2nd century centurion more worth that, you know, cultivating food for the people? I don't know.
Yeah, but you're right, that the terminology of salvage or rescue archaeology, it's I suppose it depends on how it's defined, isn't it? Because rescuing what, from what, or from whom, for what, understanding how that language is being utilized, and to what extent that language can be destructive or demeaning to the people it should be intending to benefit. So yeah, thank you, Francis, for that question, because I think it's quite searching. And I hope that maybe everybody attending will maybe take another look now at language, you know, and this is something, go back over the EES website, because you will find this language, you know, and I probably wrote it, but you know, it's important that we think about how we're writing these things and go back and change them and change the way we're wording them depending on the current situation and what we're intending with that language we're using. So thanks for that, Francis. Last final question. I wanted to ask whether there's any evidence for papyri which came onto the antiquities market before 1896 that likely would have come from Oxyrhynchus. It's highly likely that the local community would have been aware of the site and the presence of these papyri well before Grenfell. Thanks for that, Robert.
Yeah, this is a very good question, and one on which I am actually still working. Because this is an article that it's in preparation, and I want to have, eventually a list of them. My suspect is, of course, yes. But again, I have to find the attestations I have the suspect that something might be in the Berlin or the Vienna collections. So yeah, and still I am convinced that yes, the dealers knew very well what was available, and dealers and local people knew a lot. There is a sentence of Budge in his autobiography that says that he, of course, uses horrible terminology, but like the natives always know better than we do. So recognizing how, the natives, including the dealers, were really a source of information. And that's the other thing that would be interesting to explore more, is how actually the local, the Egyptians, dealers, and also people who just found things and brought it to the market in Cairo or elsewhere, elsewhere, constructed actually other narratives to fit the expectations of the Westerners, the Western buyers. So for instance, all these tale of discovery in caves or in inside sarcophagi are very interesting to deconstruct. And a lot has been done again by Brent Nongbri, even in his blog, and others who are mainly working on the Dead Sea Scroll. But I think that also for papyrology, a lot needs to be done.
Yeah, and this is really a ground where traditional ideas of Egyptology and papyrology really, rub together.
Yes.
There's no division. So thank you so much, Roberta. It's been really fascinating. And this discussion has really left me with a lot to unpack. I'm going to have to go and redo the entire EES website. But but no, this is important, and these discussions are helpful. And I think this really is a web of different narratives of discovery that you're uncovering. And I think, we need to reflect internally on how we still continue to maybe or the media in particular maybe still over sensationalizes some of these things, and we need to reflect on that and who that language might be damaging to. So thank you so much for bringing that to not just my attention, but hopefully everybody's attention in the chat as well. So thank you all for attending. Hopefully the chat is open, so please do send your notes of thanks through, and do continue the discussion on social media as well, where we'll be continuing to follow the chat. So thank you again, Roberta. That's been
thank you, and thank you to the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care and stay safe. See you in another event soon. Bye for now.